Watch the professor in formal attire lighting those books on fire. His name is Jabbar. He's leading a public demonstration burning Bibles outside his university. Then the flames turn brilliant white, wind erupts from nowhere, and he collapses to his knees in terror.
My name is Jabbar. I'm 42 years old. On March 15th, 2019, I was a respected Islamic studies professor at the State University. That afternoon, I organized what I thought was a righteous demonstration. I gathered Bibles to burn them publicly outside the campus gates. I had no idea I was about to encounter something that would shatter everything I believed. I grew up in a household where faith wasn't just practiced, it was lived and breathed every single day. My father served as an imam at our local mosque, and his father before him had done the same. From the time I could speak, I was learning verses from the Quran. By age 12, I had memorized significant portions of it. Prayer wasn't something we did 5 times a day. It was the rhythm that structured our entire existence. Everything revolved around our devotion to Islam. My parents sent me to the best Islamic schools they could afford. I excelled in religious studies, always at the top of my class. While other boys my age were playing soccer or chasing girls, I was debating theological points with scholars twice my age. My father would beam with pride when I could cite hadith from memory or explain complex points of Islamic law. He used to tell visitors, Jabbar will be a great teacher of the faith one day. I carried that expectation like a badge of honor. When I was accepted to Cairo University to pursue my doctorate in Islamic studies, my entire family celebrated. It was the culmination of years of dedication and study. I spent 6 years in Egypt, immersing myself in Islamic scholarship, learning from some of the most respected teachers in the Muslim world. My dissertation focused on comparative religion, specifically examining what I saw as the theological errors in Christianity. I genuinely believed I was equipping myself to defend truth against falsehood. After earning my doctorate, I returned home and secured a position as a professor of Islamic studies at the State University. I was only 29 years old, one of the youngest professors in the department. I married a woman from a good Muslim family, someone who shared my devotion to our faith. Over the next few years, we had 3 beautiful children. I raised them the same way my father raised me, with strict adherence to Islamic practice and constant instruction in the faith. My life had a clear purpose and direction. I taught courses on Islamic theology, the Quran, and comparative religion. My comparative religion course was particularly popular because I didn't shy away from critiquing other faiths. I would systematically dismantle Christian theology in front of my students, showing them what I believed were the contradictions and corruptions in the Bible. I did this not out of malice, but because I genuinely thought I was protecting young minds from deception. For 13 years, I lived this way. Respected professor, devoted husband, diligent father, faithful Muslim. I loved my faith deeply. I loved the structure it gave my life, the community it provided, the certainty it offered about the nature of God and truth. When I bowed in prayer, I felt connected to something greater than myself. I thought I had everything figured out. Then things started changing on our campus. Christian missionaries began showing up at the university gates, handing out literature to students. At first, it was just occasional, maybe once a month. But over time, it became more frequent. They would set up tables with stacks of Bibles and pamphlets, offering them freely to anyone who walked by. Some students would take them out of curiosity. Others would argue with the missionaries, defending Islam. I watched this development with growing concern. Students started coming to my office with questions. One young woman asked me, "Professor, the Christians say Jesus died for our sins. Why do we reject this?" Another student wanted to know why Muslims and Christians had such different understandings of who Jesus was. These were good questions, questions I had answers for. But the fact that they were being asked at all troubled me. It meant the Christian message was getting through, taking root in young minds. I began hearing whispers that some students had converted. A young man from the engineering department had started attending a church. A girl from the literature program had been baptized. These weren't just rumors, they were confirmed facts. I saw this as a crisis. These were Muslim students from Muslim families, being led astray by what I considered corrupted teachings. I discussed the situation with the department head, a man I respected greatly. He shared my concerns. We would sit in his office drinking tea, talking about how Christianity was spreading on our campus like a disease. These missionaries are clever, he would say. They target the youth with promises of love and acceptance. I agreed completely. I saw the whole thing as a sophisticated deception aimed at pulling people away from the true faith. The department head and I decided something had to be done. We couldn't just stand by and watch our students be corrupted. We needed to make a statement, something public and unmistakable. After several discussions, we settled on the idea of a demonstration. We would gather the Bibles that had been distributed on campus and burn them publicly. It would send a clear message that false scriptures would not be tolerated, that we were serious about protecting Islamic faith and values. I volunteered to lead the demonstration. As the senior professor of Islamic studies, it seemed appropriate that I should be the one to light the fire. We involved 2 other professors from our department, men who shared our concerns. Together, we planned every detail. We chose the main entrance to the university because it had the most foot traffic. We selected Friday afternoon because classes would be ending and crowds would be largest. We even secured permission from university administration, framing it as a religious demonstration protected by our right to free expression. In the weeks leading up to the event, we collected Bibles. Some we confiscated from students who had received them. Others we gathered from the tables the missionaries had set up. By the time March 15th arrived, we had accumulated about 30 Bibles. I remember thinking that was 30 sources of corruption we were about to eliminate. Now, I want you to understand something. I wasn't doing this out of hatred. I didn't hate Christians as people. I had Christian colleagues at the university who I got along with perfectly fine. This wasn't personal. I truly believed I was defending truth against lies. I thought I was protecting vulnerable students from spiritual deception. In my mind, I was doing something righteous, something that honored God and upheld the integrity of faith. I felt no guilt, no hesitation, no doubt. I was absolutely certain I was right. March 15th, 2019. I remember waking up that morning with a sense of purpose. I showered, prayed, and dressed in my best navy suit with a crisp white shirt and burgundy tie. This wasn't just any day. This was a formal religious statement, and I wanted to look the part. My wife asked me what the occasion was, and I told her I had an important university event. I didn't give her details. Looking back, I think part of me knew she would try to talk me out of it. I arrived at the university around 1 in the afternoon. The department head was already there, waiting by his car with a large cardboard box. Inside were the Bibles we had collected. We carried the box together across the campus to the main plaza, the large open area right at the entrance gates where everyone could see. I had brought a metal barrel from my garage, one I normally used for yard waste. We set it up in the center of the plaza, positioning it carefully so it would be visible from multiple angles. Students were already starting to gather. Word had spread on social media that something was going to happen. I saw groups of young people walking toward us, curious expressions on their faces. Some were my students. I recognized faces from my classes, young men and women I had taught about Islamic theology and the importance of defending our faith. They looked at me with a mixture of respect and anticipation. The younger professor from our department, a man about 10 years my junior, arrived with his smartphone already recording. He set it up on a small tripod he had brought, angling it to capture the barrel and the crowd. "We should document this," he said. "Let people see that we're willing to stand up for what's right." I nodded in agreement. I wanted this moment preserved. I thought it would be something I could show my children one day, proof that their father had the courage to take a stand. By 2 o'clock, the crowd had grown significantly. I estimated maybe 150 people in a rough semicircle around the barrel. Most were students, but I also saw other faculty members watching from a distance. Some looked supportive. Others appeared uncertain about what was happening. Off to the side, I noticed a small cluster of what I assumed were Christian students. Their faces were tight with concern, but they made no move to interfere. Campus security was present too. 2 officers standing about 20 meters away, observing but not intervening. We had obtained permission for this demonstration, so they had no reason to stop us. The atmosphere felt charged. People were talking in low voices, pointing at the barrel, at the box of Bibles, at me. I felt powerful standing there in my suit, about to lead this act of religious conviction. I felt righteous. I felt certain. The department head stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. The other 2 professors flanked us, their expressions serious and determined. I raised my hand and the crowd quieted. This was my moment to speak, to explain what we were doing and why it mattered. I addressed them in a loud, clear voice. I talked about the sanctity of Islamic faith and the dangers of corruption. I explained that the Bible, while it may have once contained truth, had been altered and distorted over centuries. I cited verses from the Quran about previous scriptures being changed. I spoke about our responsibility to protect young Muslims from false teachings that could lead them astray. As I talked, I could see people nodding in agreement. Some students raised their fists in support. I felt validated, encouraged. I was doing the right thing. Then I reached into the box and pulled out one of the Bibles. It was a paperback with a blue cover, well worn from being handled and read. I held it up high so everyone could see it. "This is not the true word of God," I declared. "This is a corrupted text that misleads people away from the straight path." I placed that Bible into the barrel, then grabbed more, stacking them inside. The department head helped me, passing Bibles from the box. We filled the barrel with about 30 of them, their pages and covers creating a pile of paper and cardboard. I pulled out a small container of gasoline I had brought and poured it over the books. The sharp smell filled the air immediately. Some people in the crowd wrinkled their noses. The Christian students looked stricken, but still they said nothing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a box of matches. My hands were completely steady. I felt no nervousness, no second thoughts. I struck the match and watched the small flame dance at the end of the stick. The crowd seemed to hold its breath collectively. I looked at the department head, who gave me an encouraging nod. Then I tossed the match into the barrel. The gasoline ignited instantly. Orange flames leaped up from the pile of Bibles, crackling and popping as the fire consumed paper and glue and fabric. Black smoke began rising into the gray afternoon sky. The smell of burning paper mixed with gasoline filled my nostrils. Some people in the crowd cheered. Others remained silent, watching intently. The Christian students had tears streaming down their faces, but they still made no attempt to stop what was happening. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, everything went exactly as I had planned. The fire burned, The crowd watched. I stood there feeling triumphant, vindicated in my conviction that I was defending truth. I thought this moment would be remembered as a bold stand for Islamic faith. I thought I would go home that evening, have dinner with my family, and feel satisfied that I had done something important. I had no idea that I was standing on the edge of the most terrifying and transformative moment of my entire life. I had no idea that in the next few seconds, everything I thought I knew about reality, about God, about truth, was about to be completely shattered. The flames were burning normally, orange and red and black smoke. And then, without any warning, without any natural explanation, physics stopped making sense. The flames changed color, not gradually, not slowly, but instantly. One moment they were normal orange and red, the way fire always looks when burning paper. The next moment they were brilliant white, so bright it hurt to look at directly. I had never seen flames that color before in my life. It was like staring at a welder's torch or a lightning bolt frozen in place. The CCTV footage that people shared later shows it as pure overexposure on the camera, a white bloom that washes out everything around it, because the lens couldn't handle that level of brightness. My first thought was that something had gone wrong with the gasoline. Maybe I had used the wrong kind of fuel, something that burned hotter or differently. But that thought lasted only a fraction of a second, because what happened next made no scientific sense at all. I should have felt intense heat driving me backward. Fire that bright should have been scorching. Instead, I felt cold. Not a chill, but actual penetrating cold, like I had stepped into a freezer. My breath became visible in the air, little clouds forming in front of my mouth despite the fact that I was standing right next to what should have been an inferno. I tried to step back instinctively, but my body wouldn't respond. My feet felt like they were bolted to the concrete. My legs had gone rigid, muscles locked in place. I wanted to turn away from the white flames, but my neck wouldn't move. I could only stand there, frozen, watching something impossible unfold in front of me. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, a thunderous drumbeat that drowned out the sounds of the crowd. Then the wind came. It erupted from nowhere, a powerful gust that sent papers and debris swirling around the plaza. But here's what made it impossible. Here's what defied every law of nature I understood. The wind only affected the area immediately around the barrel. I could see trees across the plaza, maybe 30 meters away, standing perfectly still. Their leaves weren't moving at all. But where I stood, where the crowd stood, the wind was whipping so hard that people's clothes were flapping and their hair was blowing wildly. The white flames didn't bend in the wind the way normal fire would. They stood straight up, unwavering, while everything around them was being tossed about. Students were covering their faces, shielding their eyes from the flying dust and debris. I heard shouting but couldn't make out words. The wind was roaring in my ears, mixing with my pounding heartbeat to create a sound like standing inside a jet engine. My chest tightened. I couldn't get a full breath. It felt like someone had placed their hand on my sternum and was pushing down with enormous pressure. I gasped for air, but could only take shallow, desperate gulps. The cold intensified. I started shaking, not from fear yet, but from the temperature, violent shivers running through my body, even though I was wearing a suit jacket. Then my knees gave out. I didn't decide to kneel. I didn't choose to fall. My legs simply buckled beneath me without warning, and I dropped hard onto the concrete. I felt the impact jar through my kneecaps, but the pain seemed distant, unimportant compared to what was happening around me and inside me. My hands came together at my chest without any conscious decision on my part. My fingers interlaced, pressing tight against my ribs, right over my hammering heart. The trembling got worse. My whole body was shaking now, convulsing almost, like I was having some kind of seizure. But I was fully conscious. I could see everything, hear everything, feel everything. Tears started pouring from my eyes. I wasn't crying in the emotional sense. I hadn't made the decision to weep. The tears just came, streaming down my face in hot tracks that contrasted sharply with the cold air. Ask yourself, have you ever experienced something so far beyond explanation that your body reacts before your mind can even process what's happening? That's where I was. My rational brain was still trying to find an explanation, still searching for some natural cause for white flames and localized wind and inexplicable cold. But my body already knew. My body understood that I was in the presence of something far greater and far more powerful than myself. I could hear the crowd panicking, screaming, shouting my name. The sounds seemed to come from very far away, even though people were standing just meters from me. I heard the department head yelling, "Jabbar! Jabbar, what's wrong?" I heard students crying out in fear. I heard the younger professor saying something about calling an ambulance. I heard the security guards speaking urgently into their radios. But all of that was background noise to what was happening inside my mind. Memories started flooding through my consciousness, vivid and sharp and accusatory. I saw myself in my classroom mocking the Christian concept of the Trinity in front of students. I saw myself arguing with a colleague who had converted to Christianity years earlier, calling him a traitor to his faith and his family. I saw myself collecting these Bibles, handling them with contempt, planning their destruction. Every Bible I had ever dismissed, every Christian teaching I had ridiculed, every student question I had shut down with arrogant certainty, it all came rushing back. And with each memory came a crushing sense of conviction. Not guilt yet, because guilt requires understanding what you've done wrong. This was deeper than that. This was my entire foundation cracking, my whole worldview developing fissures that spread like fractures in glass. The white flames continued burning. I don't know how long. Time had stopped making sense. It could have been 10 seconds or 10 minutes. My hands reached forward toward the fire, arms extending without my control. I felt drawn to touch it, to put my fingers into those impossible white flames, even though terror was screaming through every nerve in my body. My arms stretched out, shaking violently, reaching. Words started pouring from my mouth. I heard my own voice, but it sounded foreign, desperate, broken. I was speaking in Arabic, the language of my prayers, but the words were not the prayers I had recited 5 times a day for 40 years. "Allah forgive me," I heard myself say. Then, no. Then, impossibly, unthinkably, "Jesus, Jesus, forgive me." The moment that name left my lips, the moment I spoke the name of Jesus Christ out loud in the midst of this supernatural manifestation, I felt the pressure on my chest increase tenfold. I couldn't breathe at all now. My vision started tunneling, darkness creeping in from the edges. I was suffocating in cold air next to brilliant fire, kneeling on concrete in my best suit, reaching toward flames that shouldn't exist, crying tears I hadn't chosen to shed, speaking a name I had denied my entire life. The terror was absolute. I have never experienced fear like that before or since. It wasn't fear of physical harm or death. It was something far more primal, far more devastating. It was the fear of standing completely exposed before truth itself, of having every defense stripped away, every argument demolished, every certainty shattered. I felt like I was being turned inside out, like every hidden part of me was being laid bare under a light I couldn't escape. But here's what made it even more confusing, even more impossible to process. Mixed in with that overwhelming terror was peace. Not comfort, not relief, but a deep, inexplicable peace that made no rational sense given what was happening to my body. It was like standing in the middle of a hurricane, but feeling completely safe at the same time. The two sensations existed simultaneously, terror and peace, fighting for dominance in my chest. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. I could feel each individual beat slamming against my ribs. My breathing came in short, painful gasps. The shaking had become so violent that my teeth were chattering. But underneath all of that physical chaos, there was this strange stillness, this quiet certainty that whatever was happening, I wasn't going to die. I was going to have to live through this. I was going to have to face whatever came next. The pressure on my chest shifted. Instead of pushing down, it felt like something was pulling at my heart from the inside. Not physically, but spiritually, emotionally, in ways I don't have adequate words to describe. It was like every wall I had built around my beliefs, every fortress I had constructed to protect my certainty about Islam and my rejection of Christianity, was being systematically dismantled, not with arguments or logic, but with raw presence, with undeniable reality. My hands were still reaching toward the white flames. I watched them shake and extend, watched my fingers stretch out toward heat that somehow felt cold. I was terrified to touch the fire, but equally terrified to pull back. Some force beyond my control was drawing me forward. I felt like a moth being pulled inexorably toward light, unable to resist even knowing it might mean destruction. Then my body stopped obeying me entirely. My hands, which had been reaching forward, suddenly pressed back against my chest. My head, which I had been holding up with tremendous effort, dropped down until my chin touched my sternum. My eyes closed without my permission, and in that darkness behind my eyelids, I saw things. Not visions exactly, but impressions, feelings, knowings that came from somewhere outside myself. I saw my own prayers, all those years of bowing toward Mecca 5 times a day, and they looked hollow, empty gestures aimed at a distant deity who demanded submission but offered no relationship. I saw my teaching, all those lectures about Islamic superiority and Christian corruption, and they tasted like ash in my mouth. I saw my righteous certainty, my conviction that I alone possess truth, and it crumbled like sand. More words poured out of me. I was weeping now in earnest, not just tears but deep, wrenching sobs that shook my whole frame. "I'm sorry," I heard myself saying over and over in Arabic. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Sorry for what? I wasn't entirely sure yet. Sorry for burning the Bibles, yes. Sorry for misleading students, yes. But it went deeper than that. I was sorry for every moment of arrogance, every instance of pride, every time I had claimed to know God while keeping Him at arm's length. The cold began to recede slightly. I could feel warmth returning to my extremities, tingling, painful warmth, like blood flowing back into limbs that had been numb. But the pressure on my chest remained. The white flames still burned in front of me, though I couldn't see them with my eyes closed. I could sense them somehow, feel their presence, their accusation, their strange mercy. I don't know how long I knelt there. The crowd's noise had faded to background static. I was aware that people were around me, that the department head was somewhere nearby, that security guards were approaching, but none of it mattered. The only reality was what was happening inside me, this complete dismantling of everything I thought I was. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The flames extinguished. Not gradually like a normal fire dying down, but instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. One moment there was a brilliant white light, And the next moment, there was nothing but regular daylight and a few orange embers glowing in the metal barrel. The wind ceased immediately. Papers and debris that had been swirling through the air dropped to the ground. The pressure on my chest released. I could move again. I could breathe. I opened my eyes and saw the plaza coming back into focus. Everything looked surreal, too bright, too sharp, like I was seeing the world for the first time. I was still on my knees. My suit pants were dirty from the concrete. My face was wet with tears. My hands were pressed against my chest, fingers still interlaced. The first conscious thought I had was simple and devastating. What just happened to me? Not as a question, but as a statement of complete bewilderment. I had no framework for processing what I had just experienced. My Islamic training had no category for this. My scientific education had no explanation for this. I was a professor, an educated man, someone who dealt in facts and logic and rational discourse. And I had just experienced something that defied every category I possessed. I heard footsteps running toward me, felt hands on my shoulders. The department head's voice close to my ear, asking if I could stand. I tried to respond, but my throat was too tight. My mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I was aware that I was in shock, that my body was shutting down non-essential functions to deal with trauma. But the trauma wasn't physical. It was existential. Someone helped me to my feet. My legs wobbled and nearly gave out again. Strong arms supported me on both sides, guided me away from the barrel, toward a nearby bench. I sat down heavily, my head hanging, still trying to process, still trying to understand. The campus medic arrived, a young woman with a medical bag. She checked my pulse, shined a light in my eyes, asked me questions I couldn't answer. I heard her tell someone that my vitals were extremely elevated, but she couldn't see any injuries. Possible panic attack, she said, or some kind of psychological episode. We should get him to the medical center. But I knew it wasn't a panic attack. I knew it wasn't psychological. What I had experienced was external, objective, real. The white flames, the wind, the cold, the pressure, all of it had happened outside my mind, even if it had affected my mind profoundly. Students were still gathered around, their faces a mixture of concern and confusion and fear. Phones were everywhere, still recording. I realized dimly that whatever had just happened to me was being captured on dozens of devices. That video footage was probably already being uploaded to social media. The thought should have embarrassed me, humiliated me even. A respected professor reduced to a weeping, trembling mess on his knees. But I felt nothing about that. The only thing I felt was a desperate need to understand what had just occurred. They took me to the University Medical Center in a golf cart. I sat hunched over, arms wrapped around myself, still shaking, despite the blanket someone had draped over my shoulders. The medic kept talking to me, asking questions I barely heard. Can you tell me your name? Do you know what day it is? Did you hit your head? I answered mechanically, my voice coming out flat and distant. Jabbar. Friday. No. At the medical center, they put me in a private room and ran a full examination. Blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen levels, neurological tests. A doctor came in, an older man with gray hair who I recognized from faculty meetings. He looked at me with professional concern mixed with personal curiosity. Professor Jabbar, can you tell me what happened out there? I opened my mouth to explain and realized I had no idea where to begin. How do you describe the impossible to someone who deals in medical facts? The fire, I finally said. Did you see the fire? He nodded slowly. I saw smoke from my office window. I understand you were conducting some kind of demonstration. His tone was careful, neutral. Yes, I said. But something went wrong. The flames, they changed. I stopped, knowing how insane it would sound. Changed how? He asked. I looked at him and saw scientific skepticism already forming in his eyes. They turned white, I said quietly, brilliant white. And there was wind and cold, and I couldn't move. The doctor made notes on his tablet. His expression suggested he was mentally filing this under psychological trauma or acute stress reaction. He asked more questions about my medical history, any medications I was taking, whether I had experienced hallucinations before. No, and no. After an hour of tests, he told me everything appeared normal. Blood work would take time, but initial results showed nothing concerning. Your heart rate and blood pressure were very elevated when you arrived, but they're coming down now. I'd like to keep you overnight for observation. I agreed, because I didn't know what else to do. They moved me to a room with a bed and a window overlooking the campus. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying those moments by the barrel over and over. The white flames, the localized wind, the cold despite the fire, the way my body had moved without my control, the words that had come from my mouth. Jesus, forgive me, I had said that out loud in front of 150 people. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the brilliant white light. I felt the pressure on my chest. I heard my own voice crying out to Jesus. Around 7 in the evening, a nurse brought me dinner, but I couldn't eat. My stomach was twisted in knots. My phone sat on the bedside table, buzzing constantly with notifications I didn't check. Finally, around 9, I picked it up. 47 missed calls, dozens of text messages. Most were from family, but some were from colleagues and students. I opened social media with trembling hands and immediately wished I hadn't. The videos were everywhere, multiple angles of me standing by the barrel, lighting the fire, then collapsing to my knees. In some footage, you could see the flames change color, that brilliant overexposure that washed out everything around it. In others, you could see the wind whipping through the crowd, while trees in the background remained still. The comments were chaotic. Some people claimed it was a miracle, that God had intervened to stop the Bible burning. Others insisted it was a technical malfunction, something wrong with the gasoline or a gas leak from underground. A few said I had staged the whole thing for attention. And then there were my words, captured clearly on several videos. Jesus, forgive me. Those 3 words were being shared, dissected, debated across the internet. My wife called at 10. I answered with a shaking hand. Jabbar, what have you done? Her voice was tight with panic and anger. She had seen the videos. Everyone had seen the videos. What were you thinking, burning Bibles like some kind of extremist? And then those things you said. She couldn't even repeat them. I was in shock, I told her weakly. I didn't know what I was saying. But that was a lie. I had known exactly what I was saying. The words had been forced from me, yes, but they had also been true. Your father called me, she continued. He's furious. He says you've disgraced the family name. He wants to know if you've lost your mind. Maybe I had, I thought. Maybe that would be easier to accept than the alternative. We talked for a few more minutes, but it went nowhere. She was upset, confused, demanding explanations I couldn't give. Finally, she said she needed time to think and hung up. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in the hospital bed, watching the ceiling, feeling the echoes of that pressure on my chest, trying to make sense of the senseless. Around 3 in the morning, I got out of bed and found a Bible in the drawer of the bedside table. Most hospitals keep them there for patients who want them. I had never paid attention before. My hands shook as I opened it. I expected to feel nothing, or maybe disgust, the same contempt I had always felt toward this book. Instead, I felt fear. Not fear of the book itself, but fear of what it might contain, what it might demand of me if I actually read it with an open mind. I turned to a random page and found myself in the Gospel of John. Chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I read the whole chapter sitting on the edge of the hospital bed. Then I read it again. The words seemed to glow on the page. Not literally, but they seized my attention in a way nothing ever had. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I thought of the white flames, brilliant and impossible. I thought of my certainty crumbling, my arguments dissolving. I started crying again, quiet tears that ran down my face and dripped onto the thin pages. The next morning, the doctor released me. "Physically, you're fine," he said. "All tests came back normal, but I'd recommend seeing a therapist, Professor. You've been through a traumatic experience." I nodded and left. The department head was waiting in the lobby. He drove me home in silence. Finally, as we pulled up to my house, he said, "The university board wants to meet with you Monday. There's going to be an investigation into what happened." "Investigation into what?" I asked. He looked uncomfortable. "Into the demonstration, the videos, your behavior. Students are asking questions we can't answer, Jabbar." I understood what he meant. Questions about why their professor had collapsed, why he had cried out to Jesus, why the fire had looked so strange on camera. "What do you want me to tell them?" I asked. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Tell them it was a medical episode. Tell them you were confused. Tell them anything except what it looked like." But what did it look like? I wondered. What did it look like to the 150 people who witnessed it, to the thousands who had now seen the videos? It looked like divine intervention. It looked like God Himself had reached down and stopped me in my tracks. And the terrifying thing was, I was starting to believe that's exactly what it was. Look at your own life right now. When have you been so desperate, so completely undone, that you had to question everything you thought you knew? That's where I was. Everything that had given my life meaning, structure, purpose was crumbling, and I was terrified of what might be revealed underneath. I spent the weekend alone in my home office. My wife had taken the children to her parents' house. She said they needed space, that the videos were upsetting the kids, that she needed time to process what had happened. I didn't argue. The house felt enormous and silent without them. I sat at my desk surrounded by Islamic texts, scholarly books I had collected over decades, and for the first time in my life, they felt like strangers to me. I couldn't stop reading the Bible I had taken from the hospital. I read the Gospels compulsively, moving from Matthew to Mark, to Luke to John, absorbing stories I had dismissed my entire life. The Jesus I encountered in those pages bore no resemblance to the figure I had taught my students about. This wasn't a mere prophet who had been elevated by overzealous followers. This was someone claiming to be God Himself, forgiving sins, raising the dead, speaking with absolute authority about eternal matters. On Sunday evening, my phone rang. The name on the screen made me freeze. It was a colleague from the history department, a man I had publicly mocked 3 years earlier when he converted from Islam to Christianity. I had called him a traitor in a faculty meeting. I had told him he had abandoned truth for comfortable lies. I hadn't spoken to him since. My finger hovered over the decline button, but something made me answer. "Jabbar," he said simply, "I saw the video. I want you to know I'm praying for you." The word praying hit me like a physical blow. "Praying to Jesus?" I asked, and my voice cracked. "Yes," he said quietly. "Would you like to talk?" We met the next morning at a coffee shop, 40 minutes from campus, far enough that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. He looked the same, maybe a bit older, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. Peace. That same inexplicable peace I had felt mixed with terror by the barrel. I told him everything. The planning, the burning, the white flames, the wind, the cold, the collapse, the words forced from my mouth. He listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Jabbar, I think Jesus stopped you because he loves you too much to let you continue down that path." The statement was so absurd, so contrary to everything I had been taught, that I almost laughed. Why would he care about me? I was burning his book. I was leading people away from him. "That's exactly why," my colleague said. "You weren't just some casual skeptic. You were actively opposing him, leading others to oppose him. You were dangerous to his kingdom. So he intervened." He leaned forward. "Do you remember Saul of Tarsus? The man who became the Apostle Paul? He was arresting Christians, overseeing their execution. And Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus and asked, 'Why are you persecuting me?' God has a pattern of stopping his enemies by making them his ambassadors." Over the next week, I met with him 3 more times. He introduced me to a pastor, an older man with kind eyes who didn't seem shocked or offended by my questions. I asked him everything. How can God have a son? Why did Jesus have to die? Isn't the Trinity just polytheism dressed up? The pastor answered what he could and admitted uncertainty where he couldn't. But what struck me most was that he had something I didn't. Not just answers, but relationship. He talked about Jesus the way you talk about someone you know personally, not a distant deity you submit to from afar. I read through the entire New Testament in 5 days. I barely slept. I barely ate. My wife called twice, but I let it go to voicemail. I was consumed with understanding what had happened to me, with reconciling the experience by the barrel with everything I had believed for 42 years. The more I read, the more my Islamic framework crumbled. The Jesus of the Bible wasn't a corrupted version of a prophet. He was either who he claimed to be, God in flesh, or he was a delusional madman. There was no middle ground. On March 29th, exactly 2 weeks after the burning, I returned to campus for the university board meeting. The department head, the dean, and 3 board members sat across from me in a conference room. They played the CCTV footage on a large screen. Watching it from the outside was surreal. I saw myself light the fire. I saw the flames change to that impossible white. I saw myself collapse. I saw my mouth moving, forming words. They froze the video at that moment. "Professor Jabbar," the dean said carefully, "can you explain what happened that day?" The room was completely silent. 5 pairs of eyes watched me, waiting. This was my moment of choice. I could lie. I could say I had a medical episode, that I was confused, that the stress of the demonstration had caused some kind of breakdown. I could protect my career, my reputation, my position in the community, or I could tell the truth. "I encountered Jesus Christ," I said. My voice was steady, and he showed me I was wrong. The department head closed his eyes. The dean's face hardened. One of the board members actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Jabbar," the department head said, and his voice was pleading. "Think about what you're saying. Think about your position, your family, your future. This is madness. Recant this foolishness and we can move past it," the dean added. "We'll say you had a stress-induced episode, medical leave, some therapy, and you can return to teaching." I thought about the white flames. I thought about my knees hitting the concrete. I thought about the words that had poured from my mouth without my permission. "Jesus, forgive me." I thought about 2 weeks of reading the Bible, of meeting with the pastor, of feeling certainty crack and crumble. I cannot deny what I witnessed, I said. I cannot unsee what I saw. The dean stood up. Then you leave us no choice. Your employment with this university is terminated effective immediately. You'll have 1 week to clear out your office. The meeting lasted another 10 minutes, but the outcome was decided. I walked out of that conference room unemployed, disgraced, marked as mentally unstable, or religiously confused, or both. My father called that evening. He had heard from the department head. "You have brought shame on our family," he said, and his voice was cold with rage. "You are no longer my son. Do not contact me again. Do not come to our home. You are dead to us." He hung up before I could respond. My phone buzzed with text messages from relatives, friends, colleagues, all saying similar things. Traitor, apostate, mentally ill, lost. My wife returned home with the children 2 days later, but only to pack their belongings. "I can't do this," she said, and she was crying. "I can't be married to someone who has abandoned everything we believe. The children need stability. They need to be raised in a proper Muslim home." I watched her pack, watched my children look at me with confused, frightened eyes. My youngest daughter asked, "Daddy, why is everyone angry at you?" I had no answer she would understand. They left on April 3rd. The house felt like a tomb. I had lost my job, my family, my community, my identity. Everything that had defined me was gone. I sat in my empty office surrounded by boxes of Islamic texts I would never teach from again, and I wept. But underneath the grief and loss, there was something else. That same strange peace, that inexplicable certainty that despite everything falling apart, I was somehow on the right path for the first time in my life. On April 14th, 2019, I was baptized. The service took place in a small church on the outskirts of town, far from the university, far from anyone who knew me. 20 people attended, most of them strangers, who had heard my story through the pastor. My colleague, who had converted, stood beside me as I entered the baptismal pool. The water was cold, but not the supernatural cold I had felt by the barrel. This was just regular water, in a regular pool in a regular church. The pastor asked, "Jabbar, do you confess Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior?" I thought about the white flames. I thought about my knees hitting concrete. I thought about everything I had lost and everything I had gained. "I do," I said. "He proved himself to me in fire." The water closed over my head, and for a moment, I was under, surrounded, held. Then I came up gasping, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe properly. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I moved to a small apartment, 1 bedroom, barely furnished. I found part-time work teaching at a Christian school, making a third of my former salary. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid me. Students I had taught sent messages ranging from concerned to hostile. My children were allowed supervised visits once a month, always at my in-laws' house, always uncomfortable. But something was growing in the wreckage. Students from the university started reaching out privately. "Professor, what really happened that day?" they would ask. I would meet them in coffee shops and tell them. Some dismissed it. Others listened with hunger in their eyes. A young man from the engineering department showed up at my apartment one evening. "I had a dream about Jesus," he said, "and then I saw your video. I need to know more." More came. Quietly, secretly, afraid of the same consequences I had faced. We started meeting in my small living room. 6 of us at first, then 8, then 12. Muslims and former Muslims, asking questions, reading the Bible together, sharing experiences of dreams and doubts and divine encounters. A house church formed without me planning it. We worshipped in Arabic and English, prayed for families who had rejected us, supported each other through ostracism and loss. 5 years have passed since that March afternoon. I'm sitting in my apartment right now, looking at the same metal barrel that held the burning Bibles. The university was going to throw it away, but I asked to keep it. It sits in the corner of my living room, a reminder of where I was and where God met me. One of the Bibles from that pile sits on my desk. The edges are singed brown from the flames. The cover is warped from heat, but the words inside are still readable. My life looks nothing like it did before. I have less money, less prestige, less security. My wife and I are separated, though she has softened slightly over the years. My children are older now, asking harder questions. My oldest son asked me last month, "Dad, was it worth it, losing everything for Jesus?" I thought about that question for a long time. I didn't lose everything, I told him. I lost the things that were already empty. What I gained is something I never had before. He didn't understand. He's still young, but I pray that one day he will. 8 former Muslims now worship with me regularly. 3 have been baptized. 2 lost their families like I lost mine. We carry each other's burdens because we understand the cost of following Christ from within Islam. The CCTV footage still circulates online. Every few months it resurfaces, gets shared again, sparks new debates. Some people analyze it frame by frame, looking for tricks or explanations. Others see it as clear evidence of divine intervention. I don't argue with either group anymore. I know what I experienced. I know what those flames were. I know whose voice spoke to my heart in that moment. I'm asking you to consider this. What if the very thing you're fighting against is the truth you need? What if your certainty is actually a prison? What if God loves you enough to break through your defenses, even if it costs you everything comfortable and familiar? I stood in front of a barrel burning Bibles, absolutely convinced I was right. 3 seconds later, I was on my knees weeping, every certainty shattered. The Bibles I tried to destroy that day. One of them sits on my desk now, pages marked and highlighted, evidence of a journey I never planned to take. It changed everything. Not the book itself, but the one the book points to. The one who stopped me with white fire and localized wind and supernatural cold. The one who turned my persecution into proclamation. The one whose name I cried out when everything else failed. Jesus changed everything. And 5 years later, I'm still discovering just how complete that change truly is.